Welcome to a nutty adventure exploring personal growth and wellness, breaking down the stigma around mental health along the way. Let's dive in because now it's time to show me your nuts.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Show Me Your Nuts. It's Tuesday, the end of July. Can you believe this? Okay, well, it's not really Tuesday where I'm recording this because this episode is pre-recorded. It's pre-recorded because on the day this shows, I am going to be in language immersion class, and we'll get into that more here in a little bit. So, welcome to our Freedom finale. And this show, I'm going to report back about that language immersion class in a later episode, somewhere in August. I'll tell you about what my experience is. But I will be attending the Potawatomi Gathering of Nations, which is a yearly event with at least nine Potawatomi nations across the U.S. and Canada. 9 of the 560 plus native nations in the U.S. and Canada. Well, in the U.S. and then there's more in Canada. They gather together every year. And one of the things that happens is a language immersion class. And so I'm super excited to immerse back into my language. I know just a teeny tiny bit where I can introduce myself, and maybe I'll try that here again in a minute. But today we are going to celebrate the liberation of Indigenous languages and how that contributes to mental wellness. We're going to look at how the older folks, as sometimes we call them, but how my ancestors, how they looked at wellness was very different than Western medicine, and how Western looks at it is we look at it as a whole, not as physical health here, language health here, mental health, spiritual health. It's not extricable items. It's everything in one thing, one piece. We're all one being, one spiritual being, one physical being, one mental being, one, our language. And our language carries our culture. So we're going to have a guest today that's going to really help bring that home to us. But freedom, tying that to freedom also takes many forms. It's personal, it's collective, it's cultural. And today we're going to honor all of those things. So before I bring on our guest, let's do a quick Freedom Month recap. And let's look at what we've looked at in July. So the first week of July, we talked about breaking limiting beliefs and breaking free from those limiting beliefs that get programmed in us between 0 and 7 years old, and sometimes actually before 0, previous lives, previous generations. Those limiting beliefs that get implanted that then crop up later in our life and cause us to be stuck unless we figure out what they are and we work on those things. With shadow work, with ceremonial work, with therapy work, lots of different ways to do that, going inside ourselves and figuring those out. Then week 2, we talked to Simon Messmer of Mental Health America of the Heartland, and we talked about freedom through advocacy, being able to be free as humans to respect each other and look at our differences and look at mental wellness and social justice, and how what zip code you live in or you're born into determines more about your future health in our society, in our current society, than anything else. And then week 3, we talked about freedom fueling your business growth and your personal growth with Paula Allen. So if you're watching this in this pre-recorded show, and I'm going to look back at the YouTubes and the Facebooks and Twitch and everywhere that this is replaying. And I want you to give me your top 3 freedom breakthroughs. So if you're watching in the chat, wherever you're watching, tell me your top 3 freedom breakthroughs. So I am honored, blessed, and excited to be joined today by one of my fellow Potawatomi Nation members. And I'll ask him if he can correct me on how I said that. But one of my a good friend, dear friend, and I'll call him a family member even, Justin Neely. He's the director of the language program at Citizen Potawatomi Nation. That Citizen Potawatomi Nation is based in Shawnee, Oklahoma. And but originally we were all up in the Great Lakes. And today we're going to dive deep about the Shishibaniak people, otherwise known as the Citizen Potawatomi Nation, which is, again, one of the 9 different Potawatomi nations in North America. And we're going to talk about how mental wellness is observed, approached, talked about in our culture, and also in our language, how those things are connected. So I am going to I always hit that button too fast. Was getting ready to say I'm gonna bring Justin to the stage. So Bojonikan, I lost my words. I was gonna try and say something else, but I realized I didn't know how to say it. Welcome to Show Me Your Nuts.
Miigwech.
Yeah. So, wow, we've got lots of things we can go into today, but I think really to first thing I want to do is this, maybe have you, if you don't mind, culturally, when we gather together, we frequently will start things with a prayer. So if you don't mind, maybe giving us a short prayer about the show, about the topic, kind of go wherever you feel like that should lead you.
Nui madmo, how mamo gostan, we do daskie go chaya kurba maja ke wab the motora or mesna tessat gom or jopin gom, quabum gi kek yajak, mina pinojak, mina yak nogajak, mina jayak, bamajak nak makshna or jopin gom. We do daskie go mishyak minok madzwan, mina chitma goswan. We do daskiego nan gorgen bekan bemajak tagze wat mina nijok meshnak waja nchiwin moyak megwajna. Ahaw, ayachmon. Yo.
How, miigwech. I won't be coming back from the language immersion that fluent, but there are words that one thing I love, not just about the Potawatomi language, but I love the fact that when I hear our language, my body, my mind, my spirit knows it, even if I can't get the words out of my mouth.
Mm-hmm. You hear sometimes people talk about like blood memory, like there's that blood memory, and that I've also heard people also say, we're spirits traveling in a physical form for this short time, that, and things of that nature. So yeah, Nistatone, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, because that kind of, and it goes along with it. What I find fascinating is also how Western science is kind of catching up with our traditional knowledge in the sense that understanding quantum entanglement. I mean, and actually 100 years ago, I think science maybe understood even a little more than we do now, and it got buried in that whole idea of Tesla's, and I don't mean the car, I mean the scientist, Tesla and Einstein, and then many physicists since then came up with the knowledge on the quantum world, and how that science is now catching up with and connecting back to spirituality. There's one of my absolute favorite authors, who I found out I was born on his birthday, is Dr. Bruce Lipton. He has a book called Biology of Belief. Amazing. And he's a cellular biologist who also, so at the beginning of his lecture, it's cellular biology. And at the end, he connects it to spirituality. And I'm like, well, duh.
Yeah. And, and one thing that we always say too, is, our language is a gift from the Creator. And even the act of speaking our language is a spiritual act. And, what you're saying about not disconnecting those things were never disconnected in our traditional lives, mind, body, spirit, all that stuff. I mean, there was a spiritualness about life in general. When we talk about what we always strive for was manopmadzwin, the good life. But that's a really hard concept to translate somewhat in English because it means so much more than just, again, physical health. It's having your stories, understanding, your ceremonies, speaking your language, singing your songs, knowing how to, to make traditional regalia, knowing your dances. And the language is really the thread that kind of ties all that together, and language allows us in many ways to, it's kind of like a time portal sometimes when you think about it. It allows you to see what was important to our ancestors, long ago, but what's still important to us today as traditional Potawatomi people. And sometimes it's difficult, people talking about walking in two worlds, Zineget go to Gengishpan Nishnabed Nadzian. It's difficult sometimes if you try to live in this traditional Anishinaabe way because a lot of our views about the world and around us, they don't kind of, mesh with modern society's ways of seeing the world around us. We look at things like elders as someone to be respected, to be heralded, to be, wealths of knowledge. Sometimes in, quote, modern society, sometimes elders are seen as inconveniences, put them in a nursing home, get them out of the way, and we see them as like valuable libraries of knowledge, and even the concept of like, dominion over things, a lot of times in modern society, it's all about me, me, me. For traditional values, it's about us. It's about us as a collective. We rise
about
together.
Our connections too.
It's about our connection. It's all about connection, really. The language is all about relationships with the earth, relationships with each other, relationships with your clan, with your family, with everything around you. There's a relationship, and we show that relationship. We show that respect in the way that we talk to these things, in the way that we see things. When I say I see the sun, I say Nawab Ma'o Jesus, literally means I see him or her, this animate being, basically, this animate thing, if you will, the sun. But when you start talking about things like that, and you start talking about an ant, for example, as like him or her, it changes the way you see things. It changes your perception. You realize that ant over there has as much reason to be as you do, and that his purpose or her purpose might be more important than yours. And we're more on equal plane with the things around us. The same way when we take plants from nature, we put down sema or tobacco and we say a prayer and we thank that plant for giving its life so that we can live. Same thing when we hunt. If we go out and hunt an animal, even after we've shot that animal still has a spirit around it. We take that tobacco and we thank that animal again for giving its life so that we can have life. And because of that, it's a much more symbiotic relationship. It's much more, it's not something where it's just you take, and you just, that's another thing we didn't believe in is we don't believe in hoarding, but we believed in you wanted to have enough. Yeah. Like you don't need more than what you need. And if you get to that point, you give it away. You just give it away to other people. A lot of times, sometimes the leaders in the village were the leaders because they gave everything away. They just made sure everybody had enough. You didn't have to have, 85, deer over here in the fridge waiting for you. You had to have enough to make it through the winter. And have enough monomen for rice to make it through the winter and whatnot. So,
and how important it is that everyone have. And I think I love how today we're kind of tying up together really the themes from the month of freedom. And sometimes when we think, on modern thought, we think of freedom as being disconnected and freedom from X, Y, and Z. And really, this is freedom by connection. Freedom by connection with self, by connection with spirit, by connection with ancestors, by connection, and by understanding that everything is inextricably connected. It's
absolutely.
all,
I mean, Yeah, exactly. Because when we make, important decisions in our life, they say we're supposed to think about 7 generations. How does the decision that I make affect, how does it honor the 7 generations that came before me? But how does it, how is it going to reflect on the 7 generations, those that are yet not born? And so when
Yeah.
you think in that large of a spectrum, you're thinking hundreds of years, you make decisions a little more carefully, you make things a little more cautious. But a lot of our beliefs too are in, our faith is just, is putting those thoughts and those feelings in that tobacco, and then we set that tobacco down, we leave that there. I don't tend to worry about a lot of things, because I think that 90% of it, I understand that that's not always something that you can do. I mean, there's obviously, anxiety and things like that, but
Mhm.
I realize that 90%, maybe 95% of what I do is not in my control. And I just put that tobacco down. I leave those things that I don't control in the spirit's hands and let them sort it out. And it's a very freeing way of thinking. We talk about liberty or we talk about things like that. I mean, it's definitely a very freeing way of being. I don't have a lot of worry. I really don't. I mean, if today, certain things don't go the way I want, there's always tomorrow. We're big believers, in being an early riser, getting up early, but also in realizing that every day that we're alive is a blessing. Every
Oh
day
yeah.
above ground is a blessing. Every moment that you wake up, and none of us is guaranteed that in life. And I think sometimes we take that for granted. We look at our parents or our grandparents and we think, oh, I'm going to live to be, 70 or 80 or 90 or whatever, 100 years old. You have this concept in your mind, but we don't know that today is not our last day. We hope
Yeah.
not, but we don't know. We don't know where that day is going to take us, and you have to just be thankful for that blessing, that moment, that opportunity to open your eyes and to experience the world around you. I don't know.
I think what you're saying also, it's cool that it brings up what I use when I do what's called timeline therapy with people. It's a form of it comes from neuro-linguistic programming, and it comes from the fact that that whole our connection to when we make a decision about a limiting belief, and that decision can happen in this lifetime, it can happen in a previous lifetime or a previous generation. So again, it's our connection, that connection of our thoughts and our unconscious mind to the universe and to the ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
to previous self, and how what I help them do is release the negative. So
Mm-hmm.
it's very similar to that. You put the worries or the things that you're whatever, you put it in that tobacco and set it down. But when you do, you take away the lessons that
Mm.
it gives you, and you take away the positive things, but you leave those you leave those worries in that tobacco. And when I'm helping people with releases, I'm helping them release the negative out to the universe to deal with,
Mm.
and it is incredibly liberating. um Personally, I suffered, and I've told this story on the show, is I suffered with generalized anxiety disorder until November 17th, 2022, when I first learned that practice as far as a quantum healing technique. But what's really interesting, oh my gosh, sorry, I just got a message from Mom Donna. um, that lesson was something that my previous kind of adopted mom, Donna, um, worked on me with when she was here in this life with us. And it was that the sun comes up where does the sun come up in the morning? Well, it comes up in the east. She's like, well, how do you know that? It's because spirit's going to have it come up in the east. And we created this joke. It was really funny. We created this joke about that while she was here, that the sun rose in Holt Summit, Missouri, which is where she and Orrin lived. And we would go to ceremony there every month and go to sweat, and so that the sun rose in Holt Summit and the sun set in Shawnee, Oklahoma, because that's where we would go. That's the western edge of where we would go to ceremony. And so just now when I was thinking of like me learning that lesson in November of 22, really that's not when I learned the lesson. It's when I finally internalized it and realized what she was telling me all that time. it's just, in a way, it's kind of it's not lost on me that came back to me in a rush just now, was her being still connected to me and her telling me that story just now.
Yeah, what you're
So
saying too about like, sorry.
I was just telling her miigwech.
Yeah. And you know what you're talking about too, you know, is like, it reminds me a little bit of, like I said before, like blood memory or historic trauma. People talk about historic trauma, and there's definitely something to be said for that. There's definitely is that trauma for a lot of Indigenous people, you know, having our children ripped away from us, put into boarding schools, beat for speaking our language, and basically trying to, as they said, the government would say, kill the Indian, save the man. They wanted to eradicate everything that made us uniquely Anishinaabe, uniquely Native. But at the same time of that historical trauma, there's also a historical strength. You know, there's these teachings, there's this knowledge, there's this understanding that's also coming through your DNA. It's coming through your blood, that's also there, so that you can hold on to. You know, that it doesn't always have to just be. There's not always just that negative side of things. You know, you reminded me of that when you were talking. So,
you know, I think it's also, you know, many of the people watching this, you know, I don't know how many, but may think, oh, Native people, they're not here anymore. You know, that's something that we face frequently is, you know, well, Indians, when they were here, Indians did this, or Native people did this. And it's like, wait a minute. No, I'm right here. You know, pinch me. It's going to hurt. I am human in this body right now. And I am, you know, I am
still here.
I am. It doesn't matter how many blood cells I have. It doesn't matter whatever. It matters that I'm connected. How connected am I? Again, here we go with the connection again. How connected am I to myself, to the culture, to and I think that's also a learning journey, because there are members of my family who, quote unquote, have more blood cells than I do, but they may not be or have been as connected to the culture as I am, because I realized when I was in my early 20s that I was supposed to bring that back to the family. That was part of what I was here for. And I'm not going to lie, it's been a journey. I actually remember being in my 20s, being a 20-year-old. I call it the white girl in Negro story. 20-year-old as a white girl, 25 years old, 26, and no, let me see, probably more like 28-year-old. I was like a 28-year-old white girl, but I was like a 3-year-old culturally. And oh my gosh, if you know anything about child development, imagine layering being a 3-year-old and a 28-year-old at the same time. And I can tell you about going through the stages of development, child development, as an adult, before culturally I felt like I had understood enough of myself to reconnected. And that was a tough journey. To watch that at the same time, because I literally would act like a 3-year-old in some senses, in learning my culture and in learning what was okay and how to say it, how to do, how to be. Thankfully now they're both adults, and they get along a little better. Every once in a while, the white girl beats up the Indian girl and says, "No, we're going to be here on time." And the Indian girl's like, "No, we're going to be here when we get here," you know, and they'll get in a fight. But you know, and that's I joke about that, but really I think that's also shows our perspectives. It shows the perspective of what people I grew up with. Indians were on TV. People I hang out with now were like, yeah, we're right here. We're right here together. Connected.
And I know what you're talking about too. You know, it's and I think everybody is kind of on a different spot. You know, we're all on that journey to reconnect, to understand ourselves on a deeper level, and everybody comes in at a different place in their life. You know, some people might come in their 30s or 40s and try to reconnect to the culture. For some, it might be in their 20s. You know, for me, I started kind of learning the language when I was about 16 or 17. Always knew I was Potawatomi, but you know, I didn't grow up in a real traditional household. I mean, we knew we were Potawatomi. We knew we didn't live in teepees. We knew we lived in wigwams. We knew we lived in the Great Lakes, but outside of that, I couldn't tell you that much. I mean, I didn't have that much knowledge of the tribe per se. And, today I
Yeah.
have just a little bit more than I had the day before. And, and every day, like I said, you gain a little more understanding, a little more knowledge. But the language is an interesting thing in the sense that it really takes you on a journey of understanding. Because for me, what it allowed me to do is it took me to all these different places where these different elders were, gave me an opportunity to sit down and listen to them and talk to them. Because a lot of those same people that did language are also the ones that did ceremonies. They're also the ones that did, birch bark canoes. They're also the ones that did different traditional activities. And so it gave me an opportunity to actually interact with some of these people and to keep their memories, there, and to have those memories that kind of to hold on to, but also to share for other people. I remember the first time that I ever heard the language spoken. I was at a meeting in Kansas. I went to one of the Kansas regional meetings, and I grew up in Raytown, Missouri, not far from where you're at, but
Actually, I am literally in Raytown, Missouri, as we speak.
Okay. Well, I grew up in.
That's where I live.
I lived on 5321 Willows, where I lived.
Yep. I'm sitting on
right over there
69th Street right now.
yeah, so very close to where you're at this moment.
Very
That's
close.
where I grew up, and I lived there for probably for the first about 20 some years of my life. I eventually went down to school in Springfield, Missouri. Yeah, and where was I going with that? Lost my train of thought for just a second there. I know what I was doing.
Spoken in Kansas.
Yeah, hearing the language. So I heard Walter, and Walter got up and he did this prayer in the language, and I was just a young punk kid back then. I'm probably still a little bit of one, but and I heard him pray, and I thought, man, wow, we have our own language. Duh. Like, wow, kind of like an aha moment for. I always knew I was following, but I was like, wow, we have our own language. Like, whoa, what have I been missing here? And so I kind of took that understanding, and I went and I got my mom got me these Jim Thunder tapes. This dates me here. Some tapes, and then I would listen to them and rewind them and listen to them, rewind them. And then I came back the next year, and I really hadn't put in near enough time, and I wasn't much better. I still didn't know how to ask this man like a simple question like, Nisha Ejnakajian, what is your name? I knew a real kind of rudimentary way to ask it, and I said, Walter Cooper Ne Gedejnakas, which means, is your name Walter? And he said, Konige. And then he went up to my great aunt. My grandmother, who was the Potawatomi in our family, had passed away when I was 6. And my great aunt, her sister, I always would see her at events, and she was kind of like a grandmother to me. And he went up to her and said, "Oh, that boy's doing so good in the language." I thought, "Oh, I'm terrible, man. This guy's really nice, but I am terrible." But it was just simple words of encouragement like that, and then and then I just kept at it, and eventually, it just started to make more sense. And it's weird like that. The language, at some point, there's the amazing thing about our language, honestly, is that there's so much cultural knowledge inside of our language. I mean, even just an individual word could mean so much more. Like I was talking about Manop Madswin, good life, good health, means so much more in a traditional way of looking at it. But even a word as simple as like Dabian. Dabian is a car. That's how we use that word today. And people always tell me, well, how do you have these modern words, these modern concepts? How do you have modern concepts and modern words? I mean, words evolve, words change, words get brought forward. It can either be a word that's been created. Our language is very descriptive in nature, but so originally Dabian, we used to use that for a wagon. Okay. But before that, we would use it for I believe the word in French is a travois, the things where you would drag your belongings basically from camp to camp, because the word itself is talking about dragging, that word for Dabian. So it shows the origin of the word way back through the word. And like I said, it shows the way that our ancestors perceived things that came into contact with, like our word for a horse is nekdosha. Well, nekdosha literally means one hoof, because if you look at a deer, it has split hoofs. Everything else has split hoofs, but it had just that one hoof. And that was kind of the thing that really struck them. They're like, man, that animal has one hoof. It doesn't have multiple. It doesn't have split hoofs like all these other, animals from around here. And so that's what it literally is talking about. One hoofed animal.
Well, it's no different than in now. If I said to you, LOL, that wasn't a word
Exactly.
how long ago. And I think one thing that in modern culture we forget that things are evolving from in that way. I tell a story of people are afraid of technology and afraid of AI and blah blah, all those things. Oh my God, they're going to take over. My answer to that is twofold. The first one, I'll give you the quiz on this one, us being similar ages, and from similar from the same hometown. 12:01 a.m. August 1st.
Everything was shutting down.
Huh?
You talk about the like. You
Nope.
talk about
August 1st, 1981. 12:01 a.m. August 1st, the key in maybe 1981.
MTV.
You got it.
What's
you got it. MTV knew what it was doing when the first video that played on MTV was
I want my. Is that the one? Was that the one?
Nope. Da 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 da.
I can't think of that one. Is
Video killed the radio star.
Video killed the radio.
They played that on purpose. And at the time they played that, one generation was electrified and excited by this thing that was coming of watching music on TV.
Yeah, one was terrified.
And the other one was terrified, right? So it was change. But so let's take that, and apply that to AI, change and things like that. But it's all tools.
Oh yeah.
Go back, you take that tool. MTV didn't kill the radio star. Spoiler alert, everybody, MTV did not kill the radio star. We still have radio. And MTV is not what it used to be. So
I was really, gonna say MTV got killed by reality TV.
Yeah, now it's not that. But the other, you go back, and from what I can figure, fire was probably our first tool that has, and we still use fire the same way. So language evolution and things in language evolves around what is this thing that's different, So I love the fact that we've got evolution, we've got connection, and we've got freedom all tied up together. And really ourself all tied up in that too. So I'm gonna look at a couple of the questions. I prepared a couple questions in advance for you, but let me see. One of the first ones is, and I think we've really hit this one, but to wrap it, how does the revitalization and preservation of our Potawatomi language contribute to wellness, culture, to mental wellness specifically, and our cultural identity as Shishibani?
Well, really, it's everything. I mean, quite honestly, the language really is the thread or the rope that kind of ties it all together. I mean, that's why when the government tried to terminate tribes back in the 50s, one of the things they looked for was, do people still speak your language? Do you still have a unique language? Because if you don't have a unique language, then what are you really? You're just a reunion of people that share common DNA. Like, if you've lost your culture, you've lost your language, what are you? I mean, why do we need to honor these? They were looking for reasons why they wouldn't have to honor the treaties that they'd made with us. But
it all goes back to I know the word Shonya. Yeah, it all goes back to Shonya.
But from a mental wellness standpoint, I mean, a lot of times, you see a lot of young Indigenous people. We have a lot of disproportionate addictive, behavior with maybe alcohol and drugs, and a lot of times, a lot of that is disconnection. Like it's disconnection from their culture. These are Indigenous people that now maybe live in the cities. Maybe they're cut off from their grandparents. They're cut off from that traditional knowledge, or maybe maybe they do live on the reservation, but they're not involved in ceremonies. They're not involved, and they don't know their language. They don't know the culture. And by reclaiming that part of them, reclaiming and starting to understand their language, understand their culture, being Potawatomi, it will help them to, see things in a different light. And like I said before, I mean, if everybody spoke Potawatomi, the world will be a better world, because once you start to learn a language inherently, it changes the way you see everything around you. Like I was vaguely talking about, like, talking about like an ant and how I see, how animals are on the same plane, but it's much deeper than that. There's some things that are just not explainable, like you can't translate them.
Oh, yeah.
And I was thinking about that from a cultural perspective one day because somebody was asking me, "Oh, can't you just write a manual like this is how you be Potawatomi?" I'm like, "No, it's a life journey, And it would be like trying to explain to somebody a sweat lodge. Okay, I can
Yeah.
explain to you a sweat lodge. I can say it's like a sauna. It's like church and a
Yeah.
sauna. But that doesn't really equate it. You don't really
No, it
understand it
doesn't.
until that first time that somebody pours, they shut that sweat lodge, they shut that
Mhm.
Mdodao gum gok, and it's pitch dark in there, and those rocks
Uh-huh.
are glowing red, and they pour that water, and that steam
Uh-huh.
smacks you upside the face, and you hit the
Right.
ground, and you realize how little and pitiful and small you are. You're right there on the earth.
Yeah.
You're on Sugamakwe, and you're just
Have you ever
struggling
been
for.
in one have you ever been in one and everybody else was dying of the heat, but you were perfectly fine?
Yeah, but that's
Yeah,
only because
me
I've been to a
too.
lot of them. My wife
Um,
jokes with me sometimes because I took her in one time and she's like, "How are you like?" I was like singing a song and everybody else was like laying over and I'm just like, and I said, "Well, you just learn to control your breathing." But that's what I mean. It's about experiencing our way of
yep.
life. I joke with people sometimes that, like people were saying before, where are Indians today? Well, we're right here. When
Yeah,
I
we're
wake
right
up in the
here.
morning, I'm a Potawatomi brushing my teeth. I'm a
Mhm.
Potawatomi eating breakfast. I'm a Potawatomi watching TV. I mean,
Yeah.
everything I do is through my Potawatomi perspective of
Yeah.
who I am as a Anishinaabe person. Just because I'm doing modern things doesn't make me less Potawatomi. I don't have to
Right.
come out of a wigwam in the morning to feel like I'm a Anishinaabe.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, and
I
the
am
fun
who I
one
am, and that's who I am. I'm connected. I'm
yeah.
connected to my ancestors. I'm connected through our language, our culture, my own identity. And so for people, I always tell people that sometimes one of the best things you can do is if you feel disconnected from your culture, and you do have a unique culture you can go back to, learn that language because the language really will make you feel that sense of connection. I often say
Mhm.
that the language took me so many different places. It just carried me because the language is spiritual in nature. It just took me
Yeah.
places and I learned things. It's like I was talking to somebody one day about a pipe, like having a pipe, you don't carry a pipe carries you. Do you know what I mean? It's not like you're not
Mm.
a pipe carrier, the pipe's actually carrying you and helping you along. But again, they're just tools, and I don't know. Um, I guess I kind of answered the question.
Well, yeah, you did, and, it reminded me of something, and I think I just lost it too, but, um, is it's that, again, not just the connection, but, oh, so, just every morning when I get up, I'm not only Potawatomi brushing my teeth, but I'm Potawatomi and Scottish at the same time.
Huh.
And my mom and I have a fun, like when I finally described her, I'm like, Mom, we're Scott pots, you know, we're
Yeah.
we're both, and nothing, nothing takes away that Scottish part of me. And I
No.
grew up immersed in that culture, right? That was part of
Mhm.
my being from day one.
But and I've
And
often said, like
culturally and language wise, I didn't have the Anishinaabe part of me until much later, only because
Mhm.
I brought it back because I didn't understand, I didn't know about our culture. I don't. My first conscious thought or of knowledge of it was somewhere in my late teens, probably around 18. You know, so hearing your story about being younger than that and going to that language, hearing that language, and then knowing that how that shaped you, not
Mhm.
only um, at that time, and not only as an individual human, but I understand. I understand how it may have probably shaped your educational journey, your choice of education, and your choice of lots of different steps after that put
Yeah.
you where you're at today. And I that's so it's so the only word I can come up with is cool to see that how that shaped you that way. But that whole like you're being Potawatomi doesn't take away my being Scottish. Being Scottish doesn't take away my being Potawatomi. It's I am both,
Yeah. Yeah, I understand
and
what you're
the
saying that. And
complementary
I
to
think
each other.
sorry. And I think I always say to myself, like I'm Potawatomi, I've got some Ojibwe, Irish, English, German, French. I've got it all, mixed in there
Yeah,
somewhere.
yeah, me too.
And but on the same note, I never really was that connected to those sides of my family because, a lot of
Ah,
my Chimokman ancestors had been on this continent for a long time. So we didn't have
yeah,
like deep German roots or deep French roots or things like that. But I often think to myself, if I lived somewhere like France, then maybe I would be more drawn to my French side of my culture, and really
mhm,
understand the language mainly because the ancestors are right there. And I think that's
yep,
one reason I've always felt so drawn to my Anishinaabe, roots is that our ancestors are right here on this continent. The dust, the
yes,
dirt that we walk on is the dust of our ancestors. The bones of our ancestors make up the ground that we walk on today. And so because of that, I feel probably more drawn to that side of my culture. Not that it doesn't take away from the others, and I'm obviously not full blood Potawatomi, but it's just kind of how I've always just think of myself in that regard. I always think because
yeah,
I've heard people introduce themselves and they'll say like I'm this and I'm that and I'm this, but I'm just like I'm just Potawatomi. I obviously am not just Potawatomi, but that's the part of who I'm drawn to, if you will. So that's kind of.
yeah,
But I can see from your perspective, growing up and having more of that Scottish culture around you,
yeah,
and maybe understanding some of that a little more, that how you would feel more, drawn to both sides of that. Because I'm sure you're more than just
yeah.
Scotch too. You might have
Oh
some
yeah,
English, you
oh
might have
yeah,
French,
definitely French,
know,
Austrian,
it just
German.
depends. You
And the cool thing is I think what happened to me was a spiritual journey. It really was, in that there was a piece of me that was missing. I knew
mm,
there was a piece that was missing, and I found it literally in finding out who I was as Potawatomi, as a Potawatomi woman. I figured that out. I by going back on that journey.
mhm.
It's literally also ultimately how I found my husband. He might not tell the story that way, but whatever. Um, I, but it goes back to the fact that we are humans on a spiritual journey, and how we're what's again? I can't see
Anishinaabe.
Anishinaabe. And for those of you who haven't figured it out yet, that word means the people. Am I correct?
It's hard to translate literally, but
Okay.
it's our
Yeah.
regional name for ourselves. I mean, some people will say the people, some people will say those that were placed down, some people will say people of good intentions. I mean, it's a
Let's
lot of, but
let's
some people say we
transition.
came from the stars, that we were
I was
placed
gonna
down
say,
from
let's
stars.
transition that to a little bit of story time.
And
Is
and that niece indicating like down, and if you go back to the original Anishinaabe, which is what the Ojibwas say, Ani kind of asked the question why, and then niece like down, and Abe being man. So kind of why place man down? What is man's purpose in a way? It's kind of
Oh, I just got some
one way.
chills.
And when you think about it from those regards, you're thinking, what is your reason for being, and why are you here today? And I always say you're here for a purpose and a reason at every moment in time, Like I'll have a class of people that go to class, and maybe there's 10 people, maybe there's 30 people, maybe there's 5 people. But if there's only 5 people there, I don't lose heart. Like I don't say to myself, oh, there's only 5 people, let's not do it.
Mhm.
No, I just continue on because the 5 people that are there are the 5 that were supposed to be there, and they're there for a purpose and a reason. And sometimes we're not wise enough to see that reason down the road. I remember years ago I had a language class going, and it started out real strong, bunch of people, and it kind of dwindled down to these last 3 people. And when I looked at it from my, Chimokman way of thinking of the world, I looked at it, I said, well, maybe I should just stop the class, restart it again, advertise again. Because what I had left in the class was I had a 78-year-old man, Leon Cross, and I had an older lady, at the time she was in her 60s, Ruby Withrow, and then I had this young man, Randy Selacton, in class with me. And at the time, he's just kind of a young kid. And I thought, well, I could just restart, because the reality in my mind, what I thought was, well, Leon doesn't really have a lot of interaction. Leon and Ruby, they don't have children. They can't interact with their kids. They can't share that. They can't have that generational sharing. How many people can they really, impact in that way? And Randy, I thought, and Leon asked me, he said, how long are you going to teach this? I said, I'll teach as long as you come. And I did. I just kept teaching it. And after a few years, he got pretty good in the language. Now, I never could get rid of his accent. He was from Bowlegs, Oklahoma, but I didn't try to. He'd say, Bojo, Nejinangom, Weknesia Wajitske. And But what he did was he became a huge advocate for the language. Everywhere he went, he would use the language. If he'd go up to the pharmacy, he'd talk to the pharmacy in Potawatomi, then he'd ask for his medicine. Go to the doctor's office, he'd talk Potawatomi. He used to ask me, "Where's everybody at, Justin? Where are they all at?" I said, "I don't know, Leon. I don't know why they're not down here. I don't know what their deal is, you know." But he also showed that people he demonstrated to people that you can learn language at any age. People try to make this big deal about, oh, there's that optimum time for learning language before 10, or you can't do it. Bull, Moach. That's just malarkey. That's not true. The difference is you don't have the problem of English all inside your head getting in the way, and there's some other reasons, but he proved that at 78 years old, he got pretty good at Potawatomi. And then that other lady, Ruby Withrow, she got pretty good. Now, she had heard the language some as a child. She remembered her grandparents. Occasionally, they would say like sitag and salt or waskuk pepper or little words here and there. And then they'd kind of go off by themselves and talk because they were boarding school, survivors, and they didn't want to share the language because the trauma that it gave them, they didn't want to pass that trauma on. And so it caused a break in that cross-generational sharing. And then the last guy, Randy Selacton, well, so this is how it all ended up. I kept going for a while. Ruby started her own class for her family. Some of her family didn't feel, well, we won't go into that. She started her own family class on 2 different nights a week and did this for about 4 or 5 years. And people would come, and she had 10, 15 people in each class. And so she taught that for about 4 or 5 years. Huge advocate for the language, huge advocate for just everything we did. Randy actually got to be, conversationally fluent and worked for me on 2 different occasions. And even today, he can still talk Potawatomi pretty well. And so he became another speaker of the language. And they say that every speaker you can develop actually adds, decades to your language's life. Because if you think about it, if you develop somebody who's in their 40s, and we don't know, maybe they live to be 80, maybe they live to be 100, that might be 60 years that you just bought your language, time-wise.
And how many people do they touch?
Exactly. And how many people do they influence? How many people do they teach their kids? They teach their grandkids. And I always think of it, and it's a process. It takes 3 generations to lose a language, or 1 generation to lose a language, and like 3 generations to get it back. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's a process. It's like throwing rocks into a pond and the ripple. You have no way of seeing that ripple effect sometimes. You just have to have faith that the Creator knows what He's doing. The spirits know what they're doing.
That's those 7 generations right there.
Absolutely. And but if I took that from a non-Anishinaabe perspective, I might have said, nah, not enough people, waste of time, waste of money.
Poor ROI. Blah, blah,
yeah.
blah, yeah.
We'll just cancel this and start over in a few weeks. Yeah.
And that reminds me again of my journey to filling that place up. At the beginning of the journey, I was pissed. I was mad at my ancestors. I was mad at them. I was like, why did you not give me this? Why did you take this thing from me? And that was my Jamokman way of thinking about things is that they took it from me. And it wasn't until the day I realized, and this literally happened in a flash, when I realized it, they didn't take it from me. They did that so that I could survive and be here. They did that so I could be here. Yeah. And then the minute I had that realization, then I started meeting people who brought it back to me. Mm-hmm. And then the day that I held my baby cousin in my arms at the airport in Kansas City, when I met him the first time I met him, he was, he couldn't have been more than a month or 2 old. And he's 26 now. Yeah. Okay. Somewhere he's around 25. But the first time I held him and talked to him, I talked to him in the language. And I told him, and growing up, he knew from the time he was a baby, he's always known who he was. And
isn't that a beautiful thing?
I felt this major calling to and at the time he used to call me Aunt Stacy, even though we were cousins, because it's kind of in that age range I was, and he still, wouldn't, but to this day, he knows he's Potawatomi. He knows a couple words, I think,
And that's more than you knew as a child. So, and that's the
all
thing.
of it.
we have that opportunity to change things like that. So, and that's a beautiful thing, that I didn't mean to cut your story. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm sitting
'Cause
here with tears coming down my
yeah,
face
I mean,
of all of them.
'cause exactly. I mean, it just gives him an opportunity to hear it and to be more connected at an earlier age. And that just kind of started him up on that journey even quicker. And so
Yeah.
maybe because of that, we can make it where our kids or our grandkids or our cousins or our nieces and nephews, they can be further down the road than we were,
Yeah.
and like my children, every day, gamegij get wegwindeke bidge on nuigwamum. Every time I go into my house, I use my language. My kids know, they don't know. I never said water to them in English. I always say bish. I say wish kebabo. I don't ever talk about pop. Pop. That's a funny word in itself in English, but
I was gonna say, yeah, that I can
soda
tell you've
pop.
been in Oklahoma for a while calling it pop.
But wish kebabo, that's what we call it. But I mean, when I tell them to come eat, I say, be a wee snut, come eat, or I tell them things like my littlest ones. I'll tell them, dapnen wigdoyen mina zagajeweben, and pick up that trash, throw it away. And I talk to them like that in the language all the time, and and they understand, so they do what I ask. And every once in a while they'll reply back. The greatest joy I ever had, and I'll be honest, I've got 8 kids. Okay, I didn't do as good a job with my oldest 3, but they still know who they are, and they still know quite a bit of their language, well more than I ever knew as a child. But part of that was because of my ex-wife, and I'm not going to go there. We're going to stop at that point. But
Different part of your journey.
a different side note there. But my younger kids, my wife, my present wife, is very supportive. She's not Potawatomi, but she's Seminole and Creek, and she speaks Potawatomi with the kids. I mean, she knows more Potawatomi than, I hate to say it, most Potawatomis. She speaks a ton of Potawatomi because I talk it all the time around her. And I told her one time, I said, do you want to learn, Creek or Seminole, which are kind of similar languages?
Yeah.
And she knows a few words, the bad words, things that and but she said, no, it's okay. I'm okay with that. Because I said, if you do, I'll learn it with you. It's not related in any way to Potawatomi, but I'll learn Seminole Creek if you want to.
Yeah,
I mean,
they're
you
not
went out
as
of your way to learn my language, to teach it and speak it with our children. I'll happily do the same if that's what you want. But she said, nah, it's okay. She's good with Potawatomi. I said, okay. So I mean, my kids, like I said, they know Potawatomi, and they can. But like I said, one moment, like every night, they'll say things to me like "Get to ban" and "I love you." Get to ban and nos. Get to ban and gie. Love you, Dad. Love you, Mom. Get to ban and Donis. And I'll say things like "Dokam" or "Da Dokam," but little things. With kids, you use a lot of commands. Not a lot of "Why do you want to do this?" More like "Do this, do that, don't do that." Anyway, but my boy, he woke up in the morning, and my wife said, "Did you hear what he said?" And I said, no. She said, he said, Buck Day. I said, dang, of course he did. I wasn't there to hear it. He goes out in the dining room, and he's by his older sisters, and he goes, Buck Day. It means I'm hungry. And I heard it that time. And I was like, oh, get that man some food. And I joke with my kids. Sometimes I'll tell them, if you gishpun nishna bamian kiep bosian wegwindek ndowindman. If you say it in Indian or you say it in Potawatomi, I'll do it much faster. If you say it in English, I'll just get around to it whenever I feel like it. But if you tell me in Potawatomi, I'll hop to it. It gives them extra motivation to use Potawatomi.
There's a difference in time view. I'll tell you what, Justin, I knew that we were going to have a good time today. I so knew we were going to have a good time, and I knew, but I also, kept myself open to like what I was going to hear from you and what we were going to talk about and what I was going to talk about. I didn't even know some of the things that and I love that. I love that type of flow, and that type of flow to me, to me, it's also a way of looking at things from our perspective of like things happening when they're supposed to happen and as they're supposed to happen, as opposed to having these strict, very Western structured things. And, I attribute my deeper knowledge of that to my journey, my cultural journey, Although I've always been that rebel anyway, that I didn't want to do things in the box. Never have. My birth story alone shows that I showed up 3 months early, and wasn't supposed to live 24 hours. Yes, I'll be version 5.7 in October. That's my new way of, instead of calling it
snow's old. That's how we always refer to it as so many snows old.
Snow's old, yeah.
Because every winter, because the winters were harsh for our people. So if you made it through a winter, that was quite an accomplishment, and it was an easy way to mark time. You went from winter to, because there wasn't a year it didn't snow. I used to joke with people down in Oklahoma. There's been years where it hardly snows, or maybe it just splatters, or maybe it doesn't even snow in our area. And I say, well, that means I can deduct those years off my age. I could be like, well, I'm only what, 45 instead of 48.
I like that. I like that.
Deducting years off that way.
What I'd love to do is number one, I'd love to ask, would you possibly come back and maybe tell us some stories later this year? Or because I know stories are important things. One of the things I wanted to ask you and I didn't get to was, are there any stories? Let me get my my little video up here. I'm gonna put actually I'm just gonna put a picture up and then I'll put the story. Are there any stories about Singo or the squirrel? Because
I can think of one about a chipmunk, but I'm trying to think of specifically Singo. But I will say that the word Singo has a literal meaning. It comes from Sinachigal, which actually is talking about like hoarding up nuts.
There we go.
Because they're the ones that they hoard the nuts. They kind of gather them up, and that's something we take for granted sometimes too, is how connected to the outside world our ancestors were. I mean, they can look at the sun, they can look at the stars, and they know what's going to happen. They can look at the moon, they see a ring around the moon, they know the weather's going to change.
But you can tell leaves on trees, then they turn upside down.
How many acorns those squirrels hoarded up for this winter. You can tell it's going to be a bad winter. You can tell that all these different things you could learn and tell by looking around at the world around you. And, and again, it's about relationships. It's weird because I remember, once you kind of create a relationship with a plant, some plant that you use in nature, it changes the way you see that plant forever. It's like they're part of your family, like I use a lot of red willow. I've used inner bark for like tobacco mixture, but you also use a lot of willows for like making like sweat lodges and things like that. So anytime I'm driving down the road and I'm by the water, I'm like, ooh, that's a nice patch of red willows, or I'll notice some, we make this drink. It's called bakwanabo, which is a sumac drink, but it's not poison sumac, but it's the sumac that, the non-poisonous sumac, but it has these berries, and it's the original pink lemonade. You can look it up. A lot of even the old time settlers, they used to drink this stuff because it used to be you couldn't get limes or lemons, fruit like that. It was very hard to get. I mean, I remember my grandpa being happy he got an orange, for Christmas. Right. And today we're like, you give a kid an orange and they're like, what's this?
Yeah.
Throw that to the side. They're like, whatever. Got a bag of those over there. But anyway, and so like whenever I see those plants, I'm like, oh, that's a nice batch of sumac over there. Or I notice, oh, look at that. Look at those cattails. They're looking really good, man. Those would be some nice ones for making mats or something, So it's like it's amowush, bee balm, all these different plants and medicines. Once you have a chance to use some of them in some way, whether it be with a tea or something like that, it's a different way of looking at them. You don't really look at them the same way. And,
you're really, really interconnected, especially.
Yeah, it's like they're part of you.
Yeah.
And you're part of them. Like they've had some experience in your life and that's why I also tell people you have to live this life. Yeah. Being Potawatomi is living our life, and living our way of life and trying to be engaged in it, trying to be engaged in our culture. But it's a journey. You don't wake up overnight and be like, okay, I read this book and now I know everything about Potawatomis. Okay, cool. No, you meet different people. You share stories and thoughts and feelings and emotions and relationships, and you offer tobacco to this elder and you thank him for telling this story. You do this, it's that kind of connectivity, and really that offering, that sema is kind of like that too, because it's a connection. Like you offer that tobacco, that person accepts it. Now there's that connection between you and that person, and your prayers are in that tobacco, their prayers in that tobacco. They're putting that
Mm-hmm.
tobacco down. There's a sense of together, a sense of joining together in your mind, if you will, your thoughts, your
Yeah.
feelings, your emotions, and
And it's something that once you make a relationship, and really even when you make
it
a
never ends.
relation, you when you make a connection with someone, you don't that doesn't, even if you never see them again, that doesn't sever the connection.
No, you have that
And
memory, that moment in time that you
Mhm.
can draw from for strength or purpose or
Yeah.
thoughts. Like it's like that story about Walter. Walter's been gone for, gosh, over 30 years now. I mean, but I still
Wow.
remember that moment in time,
Yeah.
that experience. I remember when I went up and I spent like a summer with Don Perot. Spent a lot of time with Don, and I went
Mm.
to school one time. And in fact, he taught at the Not to Wash school and actually got me an opportunity to work for the Hannahville Potawatomis in their K through 12 school for a couple of years before I came down to work for our own tribe. I've been here the last 20 years now. It's
Yeah.
time flies.
It
But
does.
I
And
remember
I learned
talking
from
to him.
Don too.
I
I was
remember
in his
talking to
class for quite a bit.
Yeah, I remember. I knew you knew Don, and
Uh-huh.
I remember talking to him one time in the school parking lot. I remember where I was at, and I had got lazy and I wasn't listening to my tapes. I wasn't rewinding them much. I was trying to read the language, and I said this word wrong. I said ginger, and he looked at me. He goes, "You mean ginja?" And I said, "Yeah, ginja,"
Yeah.
which all it means is "and you," but it's a good one
Uh-huh.
to know. Like somebody asks you a question, you say, "Oh, I'm okay," and you ginja. And I never forgot that moment though. Like
Yeah.
I can almost see, like I said, I can tell you where I was at, where I was standing. And it's those kind of
And
moments
he,
in time.
way of one, I think what you're talking about brings us back to that whole like quantum physics entanglement thing is, they've proven scientifically that once two um atoms, once they're connected, there's not a disconnection, there's quantum entanglement. And so scientifically, but also spiritually and culturally, this, once you are connected, you are not, you never are disconnected, even if
Hmm.
you're physically away from
Yeah,
um
like I said, I still remember things like Billy
humanity.
Daniels, who's been gone for a few years now, but I remember things that Billy Daniels said to me. He said things like, somebody asked for your help. His dad always told him, you help them. You do the best you can. You help them the best you can. But he also said things like, the language doesn't belong to anyone. The language is a gift from the creator. Who am I
Mhm.
to say, I don't own the language? And I think about that sometimes when people say, well, you can't have this, or this is mine, or no, it's not. It's really
Mhm.
not yours. It's not for you to say. It's not for you to decide. It's not like that, and
Yeah.
but it's like I said, just all these different elders that I've had the privilege and the honor to get to know over the years. I can sometimes, gain understanding or insight into things just from pulling from those memories. People like
Mhm.
Stuart King and Jim Thunder and Don Perot and all these different
Yeah.
elders, Walter Cooper, that I've had the pleasure of
And
getting to
I bet
know.
many a McKinney
Oh yeah, Jim McKinney,
elder, and
um, Smokey McKinney, his son, um, lots of the
Lauren.
McKinneys. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I had the
And
honor.
that, I think, just the real, like, we've traveled around today, but we've also, like, it's that that freedom doesn't mean disconnection. Freedom actually means connection
I think
in
so. I
many
think I think
ways,
that's where the freedom really lies. Yeah,
you
is
know.
in that
And
connection.
I've been so blessed today, and I know we could go for hours, which is why I'd love to be able to ask you back sometime. But before that is I'll say, and first, forgive me, for my elders, and everybody forgive me, but Igwin Nikon.
Oh,
I'm grateful, friend. I'm
mhm.
grateful to you as a and I can't remember how to say the word brother. I
Well,
would
it means
use
the same thing.
I would use the word brother, you know?
Nikon. That's the funny thing about Nikon. Nikon means my friend, but it also means my brother. But it means so much
Ah,
more than that because Khan is your bone. So it's almost like you're saying that person's a part of you. You know what I mean? So we
uh-huh.
didn't have
Here we go
casual
again.
We didn't have
Yeah.
casual friends like your friend today, gone tomorrow. Like
Right.
you said,
Yeah.
you're connected to that person. That person's your brother.
Yep.
That person's your friend on a deeper
Yeah.
level, Nikon. So
I didn't realize it was that close to brother. See?
it
So,
is.
after this episode airs, I may come back to Show Me Your Nuts and be speaking more. And you know, the rest of you out there are going to have to go to tell people where they could find you. What's a good thing for them to do if they are native, if they're not native, if by chance we have some of our Citizen Potawatomi family watching.
We have a lot of resources for learning the language. That was one thing that kind of became a main thing for me. When I started learning the language, there weren't a lot of resources out there. There wasn't a lot of stuff even online. Smokey McKinney had a dictionary with about 1,000 words on it, and Laura Welcher had a small little grammar thing, and that was it. And so that's been something big for me, is making the language accessible and getting it out there. So we have 2 YouTube channels, and you can find them if you look up Justin Neely and Potawatomi language. And we're actually developing another one because they want to move some of that stuff all into one under just CP and language department. They're slowly moving it, but there's several hundred videos on each site.
I'll link those in the show notes for this show.
Okay.
I'll make sure I have that link and put that in the show notes for people.
And we've also got a learning.potawatomi.org, which has some language courses on it. We got a course at 7,000 languages, 7,000.org. We've got an online dictionary, www.potawamidictionary.com, has about 10,000 words. About 90%
I found
of it
a
has
game on
audio.
the App Store.
There's a game on
the App Store the other day.
Game with the dice and bowl game and the moccasin game, I think. Or no, the snow snake game.
This was the snake. Yeah, the snow snake.
And it also has the dice and bowl, I think, too.
Okay. So, you know, keep your eyes out. And without going deep, you know, sometimes the word Potawatomi can be spelled multiple ways, and you know, and that's a whole different show by itself of how spellings are different, you know. But if you see the scrolling at the bottom of this screen is Potawatomi.org, is the Citizen Potawatomi Nation's website, and then I'll put I'll get the links from you, Justin, and put those in our show notes so people can find things. Yeah. What's the one action that you think the best action that somebody could come away from our show today from you? I know, put you on the spot.
The best action.
And this could be with anything. What's their next best action that they should take?
Well, it kind of depends. It depends what their. I think the best action would be simply to live each day and to realize that, you know, each day you can get better at something. You can get a deeper connection, either to your people or to your whatever, your community, whatever it is. You know, have deeper connection. But maybe relationships would be the best. That seemed to be a theme that really ran hard. I think it's just to understand that we're not alone out there, that we're interconnected, that there's a up and there's a down to everything, you know. For those bad days, there's good days as well, you know. So you have to understand there's a kind of a yin and a yang, if you will. There's a good and a bad, a winnet and a mayonet, you know, to everything. And the bad just makes you appreciate the good so much better, you know. So just, you know, but also, like I said, realizing that we're connected, not just as people, as humans, but as all the earth. You know, we're connected to the rocks, we're connected to the plants, with the trees, the water, everything around us. And if we can recognize that and we create that relationship, and we have that relationship with those entities, the world will be a better place, I think. So
I love that. I love that. I think that's an amazing message for us to end today on. I'll say again, miigwech. And I really appreciate our relationship spanning years, and also being right here where I'm sitting, and right where you're sitting. You know, I'm very there's a piece of me where you're sitting, and there's a piece of you sitting here.
I still say I'm from Kansas City, so that was,
yeah.
I introduced myself. Because I don't
Well,
say
and
Raytown
really,
because nobody knows where it is. But,
yeah. Well, and even at that, you know, if somebody asks, "Are you from Raytown?" It's, "Are you Raytown or Raytown South?" That's a
yeah,
whole different question.
yeah.
So I really appreciate you. I thank you, and I cannot wait to learn more from you at the learn more from you and the elders and other people that are going to be at the gathering, and people watching. I appreciate the that if you've watched this far, then you already are connected, and that means more to me than I can really verbally describe. There aren't words that really describe how grateful I am for you as an audience. So thank you. And I will see you in August. The theme for August, where we're going to pick up, is, now I need to look at my note because I forgot. I'm pretty sure it's resilience. We're talking about resilience next month. So we're talking freedom now, and now we're talking about resilience. So some of that strength.
And maybe
So I will
maybe
see.
a good maybe a good way to end things too might be that we don't have a word for goodbye in Potawatomi. You know, it's always until another time or later on, or see you again. You know, so
Bamapi.
Bamamina, Bamapi or
Bamamina.
Bamamina, and later again, Bamamina.
I may have to start closing the show with that. So we say there's a hashtag born every week. Maybe I need to use the hashtag Bamamina to teach my audience about that.
Later again, yeah, because there's not there because like I said, you know, we believe, you know, really that we're just spirits here trapped in a physical shape at this moment in time, and it's not an end. It's just a cycle. It's a
Continuation.
moment in time, you know. And we do believe that we will see our ancestors, our relatives again, you know. So
Bamamina.
Bamamina.
Thank you for joining us on this nutty adventure. Remember, personal growth and wellness are journeys best taken together. Keep exploring, keep growing, and don't forget to show me your nuts next time.